16.1 Asexual reproduction. Please remember to go back to the objectives and make sure that you can fulfill them. Okay, so what's reproduction? Reproduction, it is the ability of living organisms to make new organisms of the same species as themselves, which means that reproduction is making more of the same kind. Like, if you're a human, your offspring will be humans too. If you're a turtle, the offspring will be turtles. So it is the ability of making more organisms of the same kind. Each organism, its own specific method of reproduction. Either they reproduce sexually or asexually. Okay, how does this happen? So first, the difference between asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction involves only one parent, so the offspring are coming only from one parent, while the sexual reproduction, it involves two partners or two parents, a male and a female. So any kind of reproduction that involves male and female, it's a type of sexual reproduction. But if it has only one parent, this means that it is a type of asexual reproduction. Produce genetically identical organisms to their single parent. So, for example, if this single parent has a specific disease, all the offspring will have the same exact disease. But here in sexual reproduction, they reproduce genetically different organisms because the organisms or the offspring will have a mix combination between the DNA or the genes of both parents. So if one of the parents has a disease, it's not necessarily transferred to their offspring. Also, it happens quickly with no variation. Which one? The asexual reproduction. Because there is no need for finding a mate and taking time for reproduction. Asexual reproduction is fast and it has no variation. As we said before, the offspring are identical to the single parent. But it is an advantage in some cases when we need a specific feature to be in all of the crop, for example. But it is a disadvantage if I have a diseased parent because the disease will be in all of the offspring. But in sexual reproduction, it is slower, but it produces variation. I have variety of characteristics or traits because for each trait, I have two copies. I have a copy from the first parent and a copy from the second parent. Examples, in asexual reproduction, we have potatoes and we have bacteria. Bacteria reproduce by binary fission, which is the simplest way of asexual reproduction. Just one cell splits into two, so now I have more of the same kind. Almost all fungi reproduce also asexually by a process called spore formation. Sexual reproduction examples like humans, dogs, all mammals. Okay, let's dig deeper into the examples and types of asexual reproduction. This type of asexual reproduction is called the vegetative propagation, where plants produce small plantlets at the edges of the leaf. So again, vegetative propagation is when plants produce small plantlets at the edge of the leaf. Okay. Potatoes also reproduce asexually. Actually, they are one of the most famous examples. How? By stem tubers or potato tubers. How does this happen? First, some potato stems grow normally, like those. They grow up outside of the ground, while other stems, they grow under the ground horizontally, here on the sides. And then by the end on the tip of them, by the end of those horizontal stems, there is a tuber formed. So it swells and forms a tuber. What does this tuber have? It's filled with the food material. Now, if you go back to remember photosynthesis, the food of the plant is stored as starch. That's why, if you remember, we always say that potatoes are full of starch. Why? Because the deposited food inside it is starch. Because glucose is stored as starch in plants, if you remember. Okay, and then the connection with the parent plant will get decayed or it will rot. So now this tuber is on its own. So now from the eyes on the tuber, there will grow roots and shoots, and it's going to become a plant on its own. And then it's now capable of making photosynthesis because it started growing a shoot outside of the soil, and now we have a new plant by asexual reproduction from a single parent plant. Okay, fungi. Almost all fungi reproduce asexually, as we said before. One of the most famous examples is the mucor. It is the common pin mold, as you see it here. How does it grow? It grows often on bread and tomatoes. When it grows, a hypha grows, as you see here, it looks like a root. Okay, it grows vertically and swells with cytoplasm. This cytoplasm is full of nuclei, and as we know, nuclei contain the genetic material, which means that each nucleus can form a cell on its own, and this is how they reproduce, and they start forming the spores that will go to another place and land to form new mold. Okay. Another example of asexual reproduction is the binary fission, which is the way bacteria reproduces. So first, bacteria gets larger in size, and then it duplicates or makes a copy of its DNA. And then this cleavage is formed and the cell divides into two cells. It's the simplest form of asexual reproduction, as we agreed before. Hydra. Hydra, it is an aqueous organism. It grows in fresh waters. So how does it reproduce? It reproduces by bud formation or budding. A bud starts forming on any part of the organism, and then it grows into a full organism, which finally separates and becomes an organism on its own. It detaches from the parent plant and becomes an organism. So budding is another way of asexual reproduction. Let's solve some questions together. So the following statements give information about the reproduction of different organisms. How can we solve such a question without getting confused? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, all of these options. So what we're gonna do is we are going to write the type of reproduction beside the statement, so it's easier for us to figure out by the end. So daffodil plant produce genetically identical bulbs that grow into new plant the following year. So is this asexual or sexual? It's asexual. Why? Because he said genetically identical. So this is asexual reproduction. So I'm gonna write asexual so that I don't get confused. And then in summer, female aphids produce genetically identical offspring without fertilization by the male. What are the keywords here? Again, genetically identical and without fertilization. No fertilization. So this is again asexual reproduction. Most banana plants are genetically identical because they were produced from one parent plant. So is this sexual or asexual? Asexual, of course, because genetically identical is the key word. So again, this is asexual reproduction. So now when you try to choose, it's much easier for you. Why? Because you already wrote the answer above. Which statements are an example or examples of asexual reproduction? The answer now is easy. It is A. 1, 2, and 3. So state the main features of asexual reproduction. What are the main features? You can write any two from the ones that we learned. Involves one parent, produce genetically identical organisms, no variation, fast, or you can choose any two of them. A potato plant grown from a potato tuber reproduces asexually. Describe the process of asexual reproduction by potato plants. Just write the steps of the tuber formation. So you will write that lateral stems form, and then they swell with the tuber, and then food gets stored, and then the lateral stem dies and it starts to become a plant on its own, and then it forms an upright stem and photosynthesis happens. So you will write the steps. Plants are not the only organisms that reproduce asexually. There are two other groups of organisms, or name two other groups of organisms that also reproduce asexually. Now you can mention bacteria and fungi. Thank you, and I hope this video helps you study.